If you're not getting consistently sharp portraits by now, don't worry. In this video, I'm sharing my 5-part sharp focus formula to help you lock in that perfect focus every time. Let's dig in. The first part of our sharp focus formula is S for shutter speed. So let's just start with the basics. As you likely know, shutter speed controls how fast or slow the shutter on our camera opens and closes. And that's gonna let in more or less light. But not only does shutter speed control exposure, it also impacts sharpness. The slower the shutter speed, the longer that shutter is open, the more chance there is for blur. With that in mind, what's considered a good shutter speed when we're wanting sharp pictures of people? I always like to keep two numbers in mind. First is a 60th of a second. This is the lowest shutter speed that I'm gonna use when shooting natural light portraits of people. This is going to be best for when we have still subjects that are stationary, not moving, and typically in low light situations is where I'll use this because I'm wanting to let more light into the lens without needing to raise up my ISO. Since a higher ISO is going to increase our noise, being able to balance the exposure between the ISO and the shutter speed will help keep that lower, allowing for cleaner portraits that look sharper even when shooting in low light. The other consideration is usually I'm going to use this with wider focal lengths, such as a 50mm or a 35mm lens, to avoid the camera shake that we'll get with longer lenses. The second shutter speed to keep in mind is 1/250th of a second or faster. And this is what I aim to use the majority of the time. This is going to be best for our daylight scenarios where we're shooting in bright light, where low light isn't really a consideration. So when I'm capturing moving subjects is another time I'll use this, such as a couple playing or a bride walking down the aisle. We'll want a bit of a faster shutter speed to capture that movement. And then lastly, we'll want this for longer lenses, such as a 100mm or a 70 to 200mm like I have here. And the reason for this is with longer lenses, there's less stability leading to more camera shake. It's very subtle, but that little bit of movement can cause blur in our images. So with longer lenses, we really want to increase our shutter speed. And if I was shooting movement of people, I would even increase it more to 1/400th of a second. But that 1/250th is usually my lowest. When in doubt, remember those two numbers. A minimum of a 60th of a second for shooting subjects that are still in low light with wider lenses, or a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th of a second for movement and longer lenses. The next part of our sharp focus formula is H for high quality lenses. Kit lenses, fast lenses, zoom lenses, prime lenses, name brand, off brand. What's the difference? Why does one cost so much freaking more? Is it just a branding thing or does it really matter? Now, these are all questions that I had when I was starting out, and I really did think it has to be just a branding thing like it is with many things, but in the world of lenses, it's often not. Rather than just taking others' word for it, I actually decided to run some of my own tests. And I bought multiple versions of different lenses, the off-brand one, which was usually around half the cost, and then the one from the camera manufacturer. And I would compare them side by side, zooming the images in at 100%. And I honestly expected that there wouldn't be much of a noticeable difference, but I was really shocked to find that the opposite was true. The difference in cost usually had a direct correlation with the difference in quality, clarity, and sharpness. Now, if you're at the beginning of your photography journey, I don't want this to be discouraging to you. And I really want to ease your mind that it's totally okay if you don't have a big budget to buy all the best gear. I know I didn't have that when I was starting. And in fact, I remember being really overwhelmed when starting out because at that time, I could barely afford my first $100 lens, let alone lenses that cost $2,000 to $3,000. So if you're in the same boat right now, you can get started simple and affordable. Just don't think that lens quality doesn't matter, because it does. So in this case, what I recommend is rather than spending a bunch of money on low quality lenses to build up your kit really fast, start with just a couple lenses. And as your business makes more money, save up to reinvest into one quality lens at a time. The great thing with this is you don't need to replace these. With quality lenses, you typically buy them once and you never need to buy them again, versus cheap lenses or even camera bodies that we'll need to replace again and again over the years as those get better. The next vital part of our sharp focus formula is A for autofocus mode. Now, if you thought I was going to say aperture, you guessed wrong. And just a quick rant here, many amateur photographers think that higher apertures will mean better focus. And I've even run into a lot of established professionals that will only shoot with higher apertures as a crutch for mastering proper focusing techniques. In fact, I had a second shooter once that I got the images back and was shocked that they were all at f8 from the entire day. Safe to say I did not hire her again. But if you're here and you're learning, that's not you. Really, aperture should be a choice that's based on our artistic vision. So personally, I love creamy bokeh in my images, so I often shoot wide open at my lowest aperture the good majority of the time. And when done correctly, this isn't going to impact our sharpness. So if you want to learn more about achieving sharp portraits at low apertures, check out my video here detailing how to get sharp portraits at low apertures. And I'll also include the link in the description. Okay, so why does autofocus mode matter? And what's the best one for sharp portraits? This really comes down to the need for precise and predictable focus. So for personal photos, full auto might be fine, but as professionals, we need to feel confident that every single shot is turning out how we want it. And for this, there's really only two modes that are important to know depending on what you're shooting. First is single shot AF, or AFS, or one shot for Canon. This is gonna be for our still subjects. This mode locks our focus when we halfway press the shutter, ensuring that the sharpness is on our still target. So I'll use this when I'm capturing a really peaceful moment or a posed moment. That's when AFS is going to be my go-to. The second one is continuous, also called AFC or AI servo. And this is going to be for our moving subjects. This mode is going to track the subject continuously, adjusting that focus as the person moves across our scene to maintain the focus. So for instance, I'm gonna switch to AFC when I'm incorporating movement, which I love doing in my shoots, or when I'm capturing candid moments, such as ceremonies or a couple walking down the aisle. This mode is going to track the movement, ensuring every single step is in perfect focus. So I'm constantly switching back and forth between these two modes while shooting. And anybody new to this, it might sound like, that's a lot to remember, but most cameras actually have a simple button and you're able to toggle back and forth between these two modes really quickly, really intuitively. And I promise after you get a little bit of practice, this becomes second nature and is really worth learning. The next element we need for sharp portraits of people is the right focus point. Now, it may seem obvious that in order to nail focus, of course, we're gonna need to tell the camera where to focus first, but this is one of the biggest mistakes that causes soft images. So let's discuss a couple of the things that are important to consider when it comes to choosing that right focus point. First is our focus mode. So when it comes to focus modes, there's a lot of options: dynamic, auto, wide focus, and the problem with a lot of these is the camera is choosing where to put that focus point. And I mean, autofocus has actually gotten really, really good, especially on modern mirrorless cameras with AI eye tracking. But the problem with these is while the camera is smart, it's not you. And it doesn't have your artistic eye, your vision. So leaving this decision up to the camera can lead to unintended areas being in focus. And this is why for really simple shoots, letting AI focus do its thing, that might be okay, but on faster moving shoots, like a wedding day where there's a lot of moving elements, a lot of creative decisions that need to be made really quickly on the fly, relying on your camera to make that decision for you can be the difference between nailing the shot and missing a moment that you can never get back. This is why when I'm on the line for professional shoots, I always take that control into my own hands by using single point focus. This is where you'll manually select the specific focus point in camera. Another way to say this is I'm not letting my camera decide for me that Aunt Sue over there deserves the spotlight instead of my bride. No, I'm always going to direct the camera as to where is most important to have that specific focus point. The next thing to consider is the number of points that you have to choose from. So this is the setting that you can set in camera, And it's going to vary camera by camera, but for portrait photography like we do, we want the maximum number of points because again, that's going to give us more precise control over where we can put that focus point. So as an example, you can see 11 points doesn't give us that many options as say if we had 51 points. And this is going to make a massive difference in an image that's tack sharp versus one that's slightly soft. And the reason for this is when we have less points, what many photographers do is a technique called focus and recompose. And this is where they focus it and then slightly shift the camera to like basically set their composition. So instead of moving that focus point in camera to exactly where they want it to be, they're moving the camera itself. And this is actually one of the biggest things that can throw off focus in our images because you're actually shifting the plane of focus, which we will talk more on in a minute. But as a side note, for anyone that's shooting mirrorless, one of the things I love about mirrorless is the focus points go all the way to the end of the sensor. So we have that full area to choose from when it comes to our focus points. And this is wonderful for our more creative compositions, pulled back shots where the subject might be closer to the edges of the frame. Prior to mirrorless, I needed to very slightly recompose for those situations because standard DSLRs don't cover that full range and have focus points up against the edges, whereas mirrorless has eliminated that. And this actually leads perfectly to the next part of our sharp focus framework, which is P for plane of focus. And understanding our plane of focus is really key to achieving sharp images, especially when shooting at those lower apertures and f-stops. And there's two primary factors that are going to make up your plane of focus. The first is your focus point that you set your camera to. And the second thing is your camera angle. So based on these two things, if we were to imagine there's an invisible sheet similar to a sheet of paper that runs through your picture, I'll turn to the side, that sheet of paper is going to follow the angle of your camera and move out to your focus point. So this will follow your angle of your camera and that will be your focus plane. So everything touching this plane is going to be sharp and clear, and anything either in front or behind that plane is going to slowly fall out of focus, faster or slower based on things such as our depth of field and distance. But that sharpest point is always going to be right along that focal plane. So this is really important to know when shooting more than one person. When shooting one person, we typically only need to focus on that single focus point. But where focal plane is really important is when we want more than one thing within the frame in focus, such as if we're shooting a couple, a family, and especially with group portraits. So if you want to learn more about focus plane, this video is actually part of a full series of videos I've made on getting sharper photos of people. And I have two other videos where I talk about focal plane more in depth. One on how you can get sharp portraits shooting with low apertures or f-stop numbers, where I illustrate how plane of focus works. And another video on getting sharp pictures of groups, where we talk about the nuances of photographing when you have more than one person. I'll link both of those videos in the description to check out after this. Now, even if you do everything that we talked about here, your images may still look soft and blurry. So I have a bonus tip to help with this. But first, if you're new here and you love learning about photography, editing, and growing your business, hit that subscribe button. It is one of the best ways to stay updated and support this channel. And if you're interested in the full beginning to end workflow for creating photography that commands a premium, check out my shooting and editing course, Shoot to Edit. In it, you'll learn everything you need to know about how to intuitively craft your best work. All right, bonus tip. For sharper portraits, we also really need to understand how post-processing plays a role in getting that optimal sharpness. Because the thing is, even when we nail focus in camera, our images can still appear slightly soft when posted to social media, posted to website portfolios, or when printed large. So it's really important to know how to use our editing tools to get that optimal sharpness for each of these different scenarios. Post-processing is a really powerful tool for enhancing sharpness, but there's two common mistakes. And the first is just not using it at all, or an even bigger one is over-sharpening. And I see this a lot, hoping that over-sharpening our images will make them appear sharp. But remember, less is often more when it comes to sharpening. And this mistake can really make your images look amateur. Also why we don't want the same sharpening for our different delivery formats. Size down for web is going to require different sharpening than high resolution image edits. So if you'd be interested in a full video on sharpening in Lightroom, drop the word sharpening below to let me know, and perhaps I'll do it on my next Edit Together series. And now you know the basic formula for getting sharp portraits, but you might not know how to do this when capturing groups of 2 to more people. If that's you, watch this next video here where I'll talk all about how to get sharp group portraits. And I'll catch you there.